Brookside. We're really happy to have you here. This is probably our largest crowd we've had this year, and still people are going to be standing room only pretty soon. So this is obviously a very attractive program, and hopefully it's because a lot of you either know about the Malta Test Station or don't know about the Malta Test Station. Didn't even know it existed. So we're really happy to have you here. This is our last program for the evening of 2024, and it's been a wonderful ride. We've had about 15 programs this year in-house here, plus tours and everything else. I think we have one of the most active museums in the area in terms of programming and everything else, and it's because of folks like you turning out to do this. But one thing I wanted to do, though, is this being our last program, I wanted to recognize all the volunteers that we have working on these programs. They just don't happen automatically. And one of the things always kept our museum be able to be this busy is because of our volunteers. So, for instance, just tonight, to support this, we have Carl Mulder, who's our videographer. We have the John and Carol Bergman, who have also been joined by Ruby Marquette, and Susan's here too. Yep, Susan McGrath for refreshments. We have Ann Clothier, who's actually returning to us, who's going to be helping us tonight. And this is just, this is how we keep a museum going with this, the volunteers that we have. So we're really hopeful that, as you get more and more engaged with Brookside, that you would volunteer. Just ask us, we'll find you something to do for sure. So this is our last evening program, but we do have another couple of programs coming up this weekend. This weekend we have a music program at Saturday. I think it's 3 o'clock. Let me make sure. Yes, 3 o'clock on Saturday. It's called the Sounds in Winter Concert by the Stringline. Okay, which is a couple of a duet of a flutist and a harpist, which is an interesting combination. And they've been together for 7 or 8 years and have done a lot of performances in the Capital District. The day after, this Sunday, is kind of a special event for us here at Brookside at the Saratoga County History Center, because it is our 50th anniversary of our museum at this location. Our first exhibits were put in October 1974. The Saratoga County Historical Society actually was formed a few years earlier, but in 1974 we opened our doors here, and it's gone through a lot of changes. This Sunday at 2 p.m. we're going to have a 50th anniversary party. Okay, which means a party means what? A cake. Okay. But in this case, it also we put together about a 25-minute video of the history of Brookside. So that's going to be the feature of this, and this is also our annual meeting, which by the bylaws we have to do. But that's going to be a very short portion of it, of what we're going to do. After that, I imagine that a lot of you have been every year to our Artisans Market. And the Artisans Market, which I believe is in its 23rd year, I could be corrected on that, but it's 23rd, 24th year, begins on Small Business Saturday, November 30th, and goes through Christmas Eve. And we have a lot of local artisans that bring their craft work here for holiday shopping. So we'd love to have you here for that. Okay. Now, one thing I'd like to do now is welcome back somebody that we miss. Yeah, she's here. Ann Clothier, okay, has been was our education director for a decade or more. Okay, and we do miss you dearly. But she didn't go very far. She went about a quarter-mile away to work for Lauren Roberts as the assistant county historian. Okay, so that makes her within reach by text, and we can't find things like chairs. We really miss Ann, but it was a great opportunity for her. So I'm going to introduce her now to introduce our principal speaker, Paul Perreault. We haven't talked about you yet, Paul, but that's something.
That's quite all right.
Ann do that, but again, I'd like you to welcome Ann. Hopefully it's not the last time that you get to speak in front of this group. So, welcome, Ann.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be back here at Brookside and right up here at the podium where I've spent a lot of time. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and also new faces, and so I'll go back to the old playbook. Welcome to Brookside. And so this evening, we're very happy to be able to present this topic that has been something that has created a lot of curiosity in this area for decades. Whether you were someone who maybe long ago remember hearing the booms or hearing stories or things like that, this is something that has been, again, something very interesting and fascinating about Saratoga County, one of the many, many things that makes this place unique. And so this has become a special project for our speaker this evening, amongst many other different projects that he really is an expert on, whether we're talking about Elmer Ellsworth, one of the very first casualties of the Civil War, or perhaps ice harvesting, and the Year Without a Summer, and those are just a few of the samplings of topics that I know that Paul and I have chatted about over the years. And it has always been an absolute pleasure to work with Paul and to brainstorm and get really, really excited about sources, no matter where they might be, whether it be Fulton history and the weird and unusual things we find there, or things found in the collection here. And so this was a project that Paul and I worked on together, and I must say, and I must applaud Paul's never-ending patience. Because it was a long project, and so again he had a lot of patience for the editing that went into this and all of what we worked on, but I did do some of the editing, and you may notice a familiar voice in the narration, but the brains behind all of this, the research, the writing, and all of that comes back to this guy right here. And so I think it is wonderful that we are able to welcome Paul here this evening and to hear his thoughts on this amazing and interesting part of our county's history. So please join me in welcoming Paul.
Ooh, maybe you can actually hear me now. I've got my microphone on. What Ann neglected to mention was there was a baby in there someplace, and it wasn't mine. That delayed some of this work that Ann was doing. Okay, the title of my talk tonight is From Malta to the Moon. And if this slide works. America's first step in the space race were taken right here. The true story of the rocket test station at Malta. Were the first steps into space for America taken at the Johnson Space Center in Houston? No. Were they taken down at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida? No. Well, where were they? Right here in Malta. Now, I mean the one on the Northway, not the one in the Mediterranean. We always get those two confused, but I'm talking about the one on the Northway. Well, how did that come about? Well, as we all know, the Second World War gave mankind two gifts, if you will. One is the atomic power as a weapon, and the second was ballistic missiles. We, the United States of America, developed the atom bomb, obviously. We had control of that weapon for a number of years after the Second World War. But it was the Germans who developed the rocket as we know it. Is that me? I have no idea what that is. It was the Germans who developed the rocket program. See, this is slide 5, yeah. The pioneering American rocketeer, Robert Goddard, had little support in our country but for his investigation of rocketry. But the German government had seen the military potential back in the early 1920s, and they had been developing rockets since 1935 on an island in the Baltic Sea called Peenemünde. The first successful flight took place during the war in October of 1942 and resulted in what was called the V-1 rocket. And that's a copy of that's a picture of the V-1 rocket. V stood for Hitler's vengeance. This was going to be his new secret weapon that was going to turn the war around. So they developed the V-1 rocket in 1942. It was guided by a gyroscope, and it flew until it ran out of gas. They put a certain amount of gas in it. They figured that'll get it to London. It'll run out of gas, and down it goes. It was called a buzz bomb because of the noise that it made, that type of noise, coming down at 4,000 miles a minute, or an hour, 4,000 miles an hour. It wasn't very accurate. It was subject to atmospheric and weather conditions. But if you aimed it at the city of London, you were likely to hit something, and they did, okay? So even the V-1 rocket caused quite a bit of confusion. However, the V-2 rocket was an improvement, if you will. By September of 1944, as the war is going on, they had developed the second version. This is a ballistic missile, i.e., self-guided weapon that follows a trajectory on a predetermined target. So from September of 1944 until March of 45, when the war was almost over, the Germans fired 1,300 of these V-2 rockets at London, I should say England. Most of them were London, but other places in England. And they fired even hundreds more at the channel ports that the Allies were using, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, that they were trying to bring their troops and their supplies in. These rockets killed about 9,000 civilians and military personnel. They were on mobile launching pads, and so the Germans fired the rocket, attached a truck, took off. We could not find them to destroy them. So the Allies bombed their manufacturing sites where they're being manufactured on that island I mentioned to you, Peenemünde, and in an underground manufacturing plant in Nordhausen, which is another town in Germany. This is London after a typical V-2 attack. At Yalta, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin divided up Europe, okay? And they drew that red line. I hope you can see a red line. And east of the red line was the Soviet zone. West of the red line was the Allied zone. The English, the French, and the Americans each had a part. This pretty much divided Germany, but it also divided Poland and other countries. Well, both of the sites we're talking about, Peenemünde and Nordhausen, were in the Soviet zone. So if things played out the way they were supposed to be, the Soviets would have inherited the German rocket program. However, something went wrong with the American Army's maps, and they got lost, and they went over that red line in Peenemünde and in Nordhausen. Well, can you imagine the confusion and embarrassment? So when they got to Peenemünde, they decided, well, we ought to clean up. Why don't we take all of these rocket parts, fuel sources, blueprints, papers, drawings, anything, tidy up so when we turn it over to the Soviets, it won't be such a mess. They took 300 railroad car loads of material. So it must have been very neat when the Soviets got there. In addition, the German scientists and engineers had decisions to make. Shall we stay here where we know the Soviets are going to be ruling, or should we head west and give up to the Allies? Well, 126 of them, including, who was the chief one, Werner von Braun, all headed west, and they gave up to the American Army. They surrendered to the American Army. The American Army took those fellas and gals and their families, snuck them into the United States. They didn't ask the civil authorities. They didn't say, oh, you got to get immigration papers, you got to fill out this form. They snuck them into the United States. They brought them out to a military base in New Mexico, on the Texas-New Mexico border. And they pumped them for all that they could get from them, and then they started feeding them information. They became the core of the American space program. We all know that Werner von Braun was considered a hero in the 1980s, in 60s, 70s, and 80s when we landed on the moon. I like to remember that he was an honorary colonel in the SS, in addition to being an American hero. Oops, I think I went there. Okay. Well, the American Army knew nothing about rocketry. And they searched the country and looked for scientists and engineers that knew something about it. And there was a plethora. There was very few. But in Schenectady, New York, at the GE plant, there were a group of engineers and scientists who had been involved in remote controlled airplanes. Okay, airplanes that would be started out by a pilot. The pilot would parachute out of the plane after having set the controls, and the plane would go to its mission remotely controlled. You may remember that Joseph Kennedy Jr., John Kennedy's brother, older brother, was a pilot in one of these aircraft and heading towards Germany. He was supposed to parachute into the English Channel, but his plane blew up. Some inadvertent situation occurred. But that's what these GE scientists had been working on. So when the Army decided, well, we're going to make a mistake and go over that border that we mentioned, they brought these fellas from Schenectady with them, okay? Since they were the only experts that they would find. In the meantime, another group of GE officials were tasked with, okay, all of this stuff is coming back to Schenectady. The whole rockets, the V-2 rocket, the fuel, the drawings, the blueprints, all of this is coming back to Schenectady. What are we going to do with it? You can't shoot rockets up on Erie Boulevard down in downtown Schenectady. Well, we have to find some place where we can test them. Well, what kind of a place would that be? Well, it's got to be secure. You can't be having the spies wandering around. We got to be able to secure it. And it's got to be safe, because this is a dangerous thing. What if one of these rockets blew up and hurt civilians? But it should be convenient to Schenectady. We can't be running back and forth. Well, they found what they wanted in Malta, New York. Okay, it was a 7,000-acre forest preserve, privately owned forest preserve, that had been developed by a father and son team, Tommy Clement Luther and Tommy Frederick Luther, in the towns of Malta and Stillwater. It was very lightly inhabited. There were a couple of houses and there was a lumber mill in that 7,000 acres, and that was it. It had been developed by the family starting in 1898, and they planted up to 1 million trees a year, if you can picture that. 50,000 trees a day. They had 80 two-man groups who would go through and plant these trees, all pine trees, red pines, white pines, and what was called Riga pine, which was imported from Europe. The Luthers became wonderful foresters. The son was sent to Cornell to study forestry, and he was in the process of doing that in 1917, in April of 1917, when, of course, America entered the First World War. He immediately quit college. He joined the Army. He was immediately assigned to an engineering regiment. It was the first one sent to Europe in the First World War. There were smaller detachments of officers sent, but this was the first group of enlisted men sent. And its task was to go through the French forest looking for lumber for the, I'm losing words here. The trenches, thank you very much. The trench system, which supported all the Allied troops during the war. He fulfilled that function throughout the war. After the end of the war, his regiment was kept on in France to help rebuild the railroad system, which had partially been destroyed. And he was in the regiment, which was the last one brought back from Europe. So he may have spent more time in Europe than any other troop in the First World War. His father was born right here in Ballston Spa during the Civil War in 1862. He was the son of John Luther, who was a prominent businessman. He was a druggist. And his building, the Luther building, is still here. And some of you may have eaten in it tonight because it's the Henry restaurant down on the other end of Front Street. That's the Luther building, okay? Now, as we all know, back in those days, alcohol was prohibited in most towns, but it was a medicine. It was considered a medicine. So if you wanted to get some alcohol, you went to the drugstore. So Luther's dealt in both of those two businesses, and he was very, very successful, okay? Tommy's mother was a woman by the name of Mary Clement. She grew up on Saratoga Lake near Snake Hill. And while the family lived in Ballston Spa during the school year, or the regular year, they spent the summer out at Camp Comfort on the lake. And Tommy developed a lifelong love of nature, sport, under his mother's influence, not his father's influence. In 1881, there was a news article describing how the mother had caught 34 black bass and about 25 pounds of perch, which Mr. Luther proudly displayed in his drugstore window. So Mom was the fisher lady, I guess, the fisher woman of the family. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Here we go. At the age of 21, Tommy took a job with the Saratoga Lake Railroad Company, managing the White Sulfur Spring Hotel, which was located just south of Snake Hill, where Route 9P and Luther Road now join together. If you drive up the east side of the lake on 9P, you'll see Luther Road. And if you look to your left, you'll see a very nice piece of property that you can envision this resort was at. Okay. The hotel was in a beautiful setting surrounded by magnificent woods, but it was very run down. The railroad had given up on it. They hadn't put any money in it. Tommy took over at the age of 21, managing it, and made improvements, started to attract people to it. So 3 years later, he wanted to buy it. And he went to the Ballston Spa National Bank down on Front Street and asked to borrow the money. And of course, they asked him, what kind of collateral do you have? And he said, none, okay? Well, the president of the bank co-signed the loan because he had that much faith in this young man. So in 1884, he went from renting the hotel to owning it. Okay? From then until his death in 1937, he and his family ran one of the world's premier rendezvous for what was called the sporting set and other swells who visited there to see and be seen. Now, who are these people? Okay? In 1959, Tommy's widow, Alice, was interviewed about her life with Tommy at the hotel. She said it attracted distinguished people right from the beginning. She mentioned Victor Emmanuel down in the lower left. Victor Emmanuel was the crown prince of Italy. He became the king of Italy. He was the king of Italy during the Second World War. Okay? He came with Spencer Trask. Spencer Trask created Yaddo up in Saratoga. That's his property. He gave it to the world, and it's still very valuable, a part of Saratoga. Tom Mix. Tom Mix was the first movie star, silent movie star, cowboy, okay? Think of all the cowboys that came after Roy Rogers and Clint Eastwood and all those folks. They never matched up to Tom. He was the first one. His wife, Mae Murray, who's not pictured here, came also, and she was a big star. Heavyweight champion of the world, Gene Tunney, and we'll see a couple more. Lillian Russell. Lillian Russell was famous for being famous. She was the Kardashian of her day, okay? So all the Police Gazette and all those newspapers had to have a picture of Lillian. Well, her boyfriend, Diamond Jim Brady, was probably equally as famous. He was rich. I'm not quite sure how he got rich, but he was. He was fat. Okay? He ate tremendous meals, which were described, talking about 2 or 3 chickens at a meal. Okay? It filled in with oysters in between. He didn't drink. He downed it all with orange juice. Ugh. But again, he captured the imagination of the people. Well, Tommy was always a sports person. So in 1911, he built a boxing ring, an outdoor boxing ring on his property. And it started to attract name boxers. Let me get, I've been skipping ahead here, but among the more famous boxers who trained there were Jack Dempsey, world heavyweight champion, Knockout Brown, Gene Tunney, other heavyweight champion, Pancho Villa, Luis Firpo, Jack Britton. At one time, Dempsey, Villa, and Britton were all using Luthers for training, and they were all world champions at their weight class. 3 world champions. Where are we going to train? Up at Tommy's place. Okay. Well, the 20s have also been called the golden age of sports writers, and all the great ones surfaced at Tommy Luther's place. I don't know how many of these names you'll recognize, but if you're at all familiar with the 20s, they're great authors. Damon Runyon, Grantland Rice, Bill Canyon, Westbrook Pegler, Ring Lardner, Haywood Broun, and Paul Gallico all wrote of their time there. The boxers came there, the sports writers, of course, followed. Boxing in the 20s was bigger than basketball, bigger than football. It rivaled baseball, but it was that big. Yeah. In 1923, Paul Gallico described the scene at Luther's as, quote, gay, low, vulgar, Rabelaisian, and rather marvelous. He mentioned sparring partners with bent noses and twisted ears, state troopers in their gray and purple uniforms, and, quote, doubtful blondes who wandered in and out of the hotel and bungalow, and blondes whom there was no doubt about at all. And Uncle Tommy always crying and complaining over the pranks of the sports writers. Well, the soil on that part of that side of Saratoga Lake, it's sandy and it's poor. It was settled later than the surrounding areas, And by 1917, it was described as so completely deprived of humus and moisture retaining properties that the greatest part is completely abandoned as far as agriculture was concerned. When Tommy purchased the hotel, excuse me, I've got to take a little drink of water here. And yes, it is water. When Tommy purchased the hotel in 1888, it came with a sawmill, and he began purchasing lumber from local farmers. The hotel was a summer business, 3 months, 4 months. The rest of the year, this very ambitious young man is looking for things to do. So he started purchasing lumber and turning the lumber into telephone poles. This 1880s, 1890s, you know, what's the big growth industry of the time? Telephone and telegraph. So he was producing these telephone poles. The farmers were very glad to sell their lumber. Matter of fact, they were willing to throw the young tree, or take these young trees too. I'm not going to bother with them. So Luther saw that they were not very good business people, the farmers. They were tired of what they were doing. He recalled at one point that when he expressed an interest in purchasing some of their land, the locals called him daffy. Who would want this land? He found it easy to persuade the farmers to sell. The land was exhausted, and they were tired of trying. Tommy's first land purchase was of the White Sulfur Springs, as we mentioned. In the 1890s, he made a couple more transactions that had to do with his father's estate, but he really got going in 1897. From then until his death in 1937, he and Alice recorded an astounding 252 land transactions with the Saratoga County Clerk's Office, 162 purchases, and 83 timber deals. A timber deal meant you didn't purchase a person's land, but you purchased the right to harvest his timber for X number of years, 2 years, 3 years. At the end of that time period, the farmer still owned his land, you had taken his timber, and that was your right, and he still owned the land. Eventually, he put together a 7,000-acre preserve in the towns of Malta and Stillwater, which at that time was the largest privately owned preserve in this country, and it brought national recognition to him. He planted over 10 million white, red, Scotch, and Riga pine trees by employing a crew of 80 men during the planting season. On a good day, they were able to put 50,000 trees in the ground. Both the New York State Conservation Department and the Department of Forestry at Cornell maintain experimental stations in the preserve. The students would come here in the summertime to learn. His work drew attention from around the world. He was visited by experts from Canada, Mexico, England, France, Germany, Sweden, India, China, and Japan. Legislative committees from Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan also visited before they considered legislation that would affect their states. Tommy and Alice had 2 children, Margaret and a son, Thomas Frederick. Young Tommy was sent to Cornell to study forestry, but his education was interrupted by World War I, as we mentioned to you before. When he got back from Europe, he joined Dad in the forestry business and continued his education by going to Europe on 2 occasions. In 1925, he went to Germany, the Baltic countries, Austria, and I think Netherlands, I'm not positive, to study their forestry practices. In 1929, he went again. He visited Germany and some of those other countries. He then went to the Soviet Union, to Russia. Now, I used to teach Russian history a long time ago when I was a history teacher. And so I studied a little bit about Russia. So I knew that in 1929, that's the last place I'd want to be. And I'm surprised that Tommy went there. That was when Stalin started his purges. And not only was he killing his own people and the Ukrainians, everybody else, he was killing every English and American he could get his hands on who had foolishly gone there to earn a living. So when I found out that Tommy had visited in 29, I thought, my God, this is a marvelous insight into something I wanted to know. So I found a magazine article he had written. And I went down to Albany at the museum to get it. And he did. He wrote an article about his travels in Russia in 1929. And the first paragraph talks about how he entered the country, went to Moscow, he met this person, he met that person. I thought, this is what I've been looking for all my life. The rest of the article talked about trees. I had no interest in it. He talked about what he was interested in, not what I was interested in. But I've been disappointed in that. Sorry. Okay. Tommy Sr. died in 1937. His son became totally responsible for the family business. I should mention his sister, Margaret, was the first and only, for a long time, female fire marshal employed by the state of New York. There was a fire tower, the Cornell Tower, in the forest, and she was the marshal. Okay, so she had an interest here too. However, when World War II started, he volunteered to serve again. Now he's in his 40s. He's a veteran of World War I. Well, he was turned down because of his age. They didn't want some old guy like that. So he decided, I'm going to write a letter to an old family friend. She may be able to help me out. She's living in Washington now, but I'll write her a letter. So Eleanor Roosevelt wrote back, I'm sorry, Tom, I can't be interfering with the Army's decision. If they turned you down, that's their decision. But, you know, if you went down to the Albany recruiting station, and if you asked for a certain Major so-and-so, he might be able to help. I don't know. Perhaps he could help you. Well, the next thing, Tommy is a lieutenant colonel in the Army. Eleanor greased the skids for him. Okay? And he's assigned to General Eisenhower's staff in London, the staff that's planning the invasion of Europe. But guess what? He was injured in a V-2 rocket attack. Okay? And he was invalided and sent back home. So this is his first acquaintance with the V-2 rocket. He'll meet them again. Okay? This is Tommy in the Second World War outfit. He had just returned from serving in Europe in March of 1945. And he got a call from an executive in Schenectady, GE executive, saying the government wanted to use a part of his forest to test a new weapon system, the V-2 rocket. The weapon that had wounded him, while it would be an Army facility, General Electric would be the contractor. Now, I don't know how much I can point out. This is obviously an aerial view. I think I have another view which might place it in a better context. Yes. Okay. This is the site. This is a 165-acre site. Okay, still exists today. This is a 1-mile safety zone. The Army paid the Luther family, took out a 3-year lease on this 165 acres. Paid them a modest amount. They paid them nothing for the safety zone. They created the safety zone, said, no, Luthers, you can't use it. You can't lumber there anymore. You can't do anything with it. But no, we're not going to be paying you any money. Saratoga Lake, just to orientate you, Saratoga Lake, what was called Plains Road, it's now called Dunning Street. out to Hermes Road, and then Plains Road goes down to the lake. So this was done in 1991. So the housing developments are pictured there too, so you can get an idea of where it is. It is right next to the Global Foundries parking lot. Global Foundries is here, their parking lot is here, and then the site is there. The General Electric, the Army, whoever, built 28 facilities, about 7 or 8 wooden buildings, underground observation bunkers, underground fuel storage areas, 2 big rocket testing areas with their observation towers there. The question is often asked me, what's left? And the answer is everything. Everything. Majority of that is built out of concrete and steel. Those buildings we mentioned are not built of concrete and steel, but they're still there. They're still being used. A couple of them are being used as warehouses for construction companies. I'm not quite sure what. So it's all still there. This is a group of GE engineers and scientists who gathered there in at Pit 25. I think the date is a little bit below there. I think it was 48 or something like that. There are 2 things that struck me about this picture. Anybody want to hazard a guess? They're all men, absolutely. They're all wearing white shirts and ties. Okay, they're out at this site. They're digging into rocket fuels and all sorts of stuff, but you had to have that white shirt and tie on. I would love to know the names of these people, and I don't. I got the picture from the My Sci Museum, and it didn't come with the names. These are the people that started us to the moon, and they did it right here in Malta. This is an observation lookout. You can see this gentleman right here. They're getting ready to fire the rocket engine. He will be observing. Others will be calculating the instruments. This is loading the rocket. Now they of course did not fire these up into the atmosphere. They would have landed on Broadway in Saratoga. Okay, they harnessed them to these gantries and then fired up the engine, and it didn't go anywhere. But some of these engines produce 250,000 pounds of firepower, of energy. They also spewed a lot of the extra fuel into the ground. And after they were tested, they had to be cleaned with some really tough solvents. That went into the ground too. Okay. Well, it was declared later on. It was declared a safety. Pardon me? Hazardous site, and was clean. Pardon me? Superfund site. Thank you very much. And was cleaned up by the EPA. They declared it clean. They check every 5 years. Okay, and since the 1990s, it's passed every check. This is one of the early computers, an IBM computer that was used on the site. It was called a Cadet. Can't add, doesn't even try. So, I'm not sure what it could do, but apparently it couldn't add. These are some of I took these pictures in 2013, and these are some of the things that are still hanging around. Okay? Now I ask you, does this look like something Thomas Edison installed? Today we have a computer that would link up those crazy wires somehow. There had to be somebody there who knew that this one went here and this one went here, and I'm going to be spending the rest of my day doing it, but they got to be in the right order. This is the entrance to underground bunkers where hazardous fuel things like that were stored. In 2013, as I was taking these pictures, I started down that staircase. I thought, I got to find out what's in here. Well, I got about halfway down, and I said to myself, do I really want to know what's in there? So I headed back up. So if you want to go down there, they're still there. Okay, I have no idea what, who, or what's in there, and I don't want to find out. But that picture, the picture on the left was taken in 1947. This picture was taken in 2013. What's the difference? None. This is one of those gantries. It's 3 stories. The vegetation has grown up in many.
That must have been far back. I mean, because we couldn't see any of that stuff from those buildings.
It was. There are 2 gantries. They are both closer to the Global Foundries parking lot than they are to the area you're in.
That one road that goes.
Yeah.
See, that was always blockaded, so you.
Oh, okay.
Down.
Yeah, that
Can
makes.
you go down it now?
They're still there?
Pardon me?
Those are still there?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Are you supposed to go down it now? The answer is no. I don't know how those pictures got taken. Actually, once I was allowed to go down. The other 2 times, I freelanced. Okay. I was saying that the vegetation has grown up so much that you can only see it from certain angles or certain devices. But I've got some good news later on. This is a pool underneath the gantry where that fuel and those solvents all leaked. Now, this, again, was taken in 2013, long after the Superfund site cleaned it up. So this is hopefully rainwater and hopefully not contaminated. This is a picture of the facility, a diagram, I should say, with the 28 different buildings, facilities. This is the avenue you were talking about. All of the wooden structures are right here. This is one of the gantries. Here's the second gantry. This gantry is right across the road from the Luther Forest, from the Global Foundries parking lot. Okay, that is the one way out in the back. You can see it by going on. I can't remember the name of the avenue, but if you head up to the Global Foundries plant, there's a guard there that tells you can't go in, so you take a right-hand turn, and that's the avenue that would bring you down next to this.
Is that map readily available somewhere? You can.
I could give you a copy. I can get you a copy of it, sure. Whoops.
Well,
The station today, these are those buildings that are still there. Some of them are still being used. Some of them are abandoned without electricity, without heat, with evidence of vandalism and things of that nature.
What do you mean they're still being used?
A couple of them are being used as warehouses. I see truck, when I was in there, I would see a truck come in, load up something, and take off. I mean, it's like D.A. Collins. It's local contractors who are probably working for Global Foundries. Yeah. This is Building 25. And Building 25, I think, has an interesting story. I don't quite understand it. But apparently jet engines, once a jet reaches a certain altitude, feeds off the incoming air that rushes in through the motor, and they're called ramjets, I guess. I never heard the term. Well, they did some work on ramjets here. They took 10 conventional jet engines and they used them to force the air through this ramjet engine, and that was the experiment. Can you imagine what 10 conventional jet engines sound like? Okay, they talk about the noise made by the rocket experiments, the rocket going off, I think this must have been much higher, much more loud. A volatile fuel storage building made out of steel. Okay, so this one's this appears to be above ground, but I'm sure there's an equal amount of space below ground there where the fuel was actually stored. That is a entryway into one of those underground areas. For some reason, it was uncovered. Anybody wants to take a trip down, you take a ladder and go right down there. Oh, I'm sorry. It was building 21, not 25, where they did that experiment. Some facilities that are still in use. You see the open door that people are using it. There's some snowplow material or machinery there. It looks like they just left yesterday, doesn't it? Okay. Yeah. Would the last person turn out the lights? Okay. When GE left, the Army ran the facility until 1947. In 1947, the Air Force took it over. The GE continued to run it. The industry moved south. We mentioned Kennedy Center, the Johnson Center. We all know that's where the industry went. General Electric lost interest. They started losing business, and they went in a different direction. They pulled out in the early 60s. The federal government declared it to be surplus property. And when the federal government declares something to be surplus property, they can't just have anybody come in and buy it. It has to be offered to other agencies in the federal government. If they don't take it, it's offered to state agencies, local agencies. Well, the state of New York took it over. They bought it, okay? And they created the New York Atomic Energy and Space Agency. This is the day and age of Governor Rockefeller. So the state of New York was going to get into the atomic development business and then the space, on the part-time space program development too, okay? Well, that lasted a couple months. And it became, it became the NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research Development Agency. And they owned it up until the late 80s when they sold it to the Luther Forest Technology Corporation. And the Luther Forest Technology Corporation was a pass-through where we could take government funds, state and federal, and give them to global foundries and other businesses to create what they've created today. Well, the Luther Forest Technology Campus or Corporation stayed in business up until 2 years ago. So they owned the facility up until 2 years ago. And some corporation, out-of-state corporation, came in wanting to build warehouses on that spot. And apparently Global Foundries doesn't want neighbors. So they purchased the old Malta Rocket Test Station. Global Foundry now owns it. And I'm very glad they do, for two reasons. One is the Luther Forest Technology Corporation was doing a lousy business of making it safe and keeping it secure. Any old guy could wander in with a camera and take pictures. It was horrible. Okay, you drive right down here. Well, that's no longer that. Okay, it's all locked up. There's proper fencing and things of that nature. That's one of the reasons. My second reason is a guess. The people who work for Global Foundries are on the cutting edge of technology today. You would think of all the people engaged in business, they would respect the people who were on the cutting edge of technology back in the 1940s. So I hope they do something with this. What, I don't know. They can't make a Disneyland out of it. There are reasons you couldn't have people wandering all around it. But I think there's I have some ideas of what they could do in a safe way to show all of us, to allow all of us to have a better understanding of the history there. Okay, couple side points. There's a Empire State Aeroscience Museum down in Glenville. Do a wonderful job. They have created a display of the Luther Forest rocket site. And if you are interested in this, if anything I said to you interests you, I would suggest you go on down. That is an engine, a rocket motor that was constructed here in Malta. It eventually was sent to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian has a lot of things, so they gave this to the Aeroscience Museum, and it's at the heart of their display. Another thing they did, which I thought was wonderful, they recreated the inside of one of those observation bunkers, and they took a film of a rocket test, and they allowed youngsters to come in and push a button and look through the observation portals and see the rocket motor as if they started the test. So they've done a wonderful job there. Okay. When the Luther Forest Corporation was going out of business, I got a call. They invited me to go on over. They said there's a whole bunch of old blueprints and drawings and things like that, probably from the Right Malta stage. The Right Malta's late 60s, early 70s. And I had seen a lot of that stuff, and I didn't understand it and wasn't too interested. But I went over. Well, that wasn't from the Right Malta era. It was from the Malta Rocket Test Station era. The earliest drawing I found is April of 1945, done by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it outlines some of the facilities. There are hundreds of drawings in this file cabinet, which we took in the town of Malta now owns, and I'm hoping the current historian goes through it, because I didn't have time to do it. Okay, just kidding you, Tom. Okay, one of the, pardon me? I will, I'm sorry, I obviously have a little voice problem, but I will try to speak up. One of the drawings I found, just by happenstance, was this one. If you're familiar with the walking trail from Ballston Spa down to Mechanicsville, what's it called? Yes, okay. That is an old railroad line. That's the old D&H railroad line that ran from Troy up to Ballston Spa and then up to Saratoga. Well, that line was still running in the late 50s. And this was a drawing by the Army Corps of Engineers in 1947, suggesting, let me find the line for you. Here's the Delaware and Hudson line, coming Round Lake, going up here, going up the East Line, and then into Ballston Spa, suggesting that a second line off of the Delaware and Hudson be created right here, going down Route 67, parallel to 67, crossing what would become the Northway, wouldn't have been the Northway, crossing Route 9, going down Dunning Street into the rocket facility. And then, after it entered the facility, it would continue on and rejoin the Delaware and Hudson, heading back towards Mechanicsville. Somebody, I guess the left hand, had big plans for the site. If you were to put a railroad line in there, it's because you were going to bring some heavy stuff in, I guess. Well, the right-hand side was closing it down, but the left-hand side had these big plans. Well, it didn't happen. There's no railroad line running down next to Route 67. Something that I think is very, very exciting. Last spring, I got an email from a woman in England who worked for a production company, She had read some of the things I had done on the internet about the site and wanted more information. So I sent her pictures and information in the movie you're about to see. And things developed. In August, 2 people came over from England. They spent 2 days on the site with Global Foundries permission. They had a drone, which obviously provided them a view that I've never had at the site. They interviewed me for about an hour, which I would imagine will turn into about 35 seconds of time. But anyway, this company produces videos for the Discovery Channel and the History Channel. And they do a program called Abandoned Industrial Sites. And they've done a production on here. It's scheduled to be shown in January or February. And when I find out when that is, I will share that information with Brookside, and they will be able to put that on their website. So to me, that is how the Malta Rocket Test Station is going to get the recognition that it deserves, not by us talking about it, but by it being on television. So to me, that's the most exciting part of my story. Okay. Now I have a movie to show you. If Jim or Ann, you'll help me do that.
Hundreds of thousands of cars travel Route 9 in Malta on a daily basis. It is one of the busiest traffic corridors in Saratoga County since the massive tech company, Global Foundries, has made its home here. The road passes by a dormant, barely visible, sprawling 165-acre property that was once a booming site of technological innovation during the Cold War. Nestled beneath trees and abandoned dirt roads stand over 30 buildings, underground bunkers, and giant gantries, part of the inner workings of a government facility racing to develop rockets faster than our competitors, the Soviet Union. These buildings, now empty and rusting, many of them adorned with broken windows and colorful graffiti, were from 1945 until the mid-1960s, once filled with over 470 of the country's brightest scientists and support staff, all working together to secure our country's place in the Cold War. In a post-World War II society, the site was a source of pride for the community. Though the inner workings of the facility were little known to the surrounding residents, its presence garnered a patriotic feeling of importance in this small community. Now, few of the hundreds of thousands who pass through Malta, or even Malta residents themselves, realize the importance that this aging campus held during the Cold War, the development of rockets and other defense equipment, or the scientists who built their careers here. The towering gantries now stand silent, though the tests that were once performed were so loud they rattled the dishes in surrounding communities. The story of the Malta Rocket Test Site has largely been lost to history, though it is a story that deserves telling. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the 19th century and a man named Thomas Clement Luther. Luther was born in Ballston Spa in 1863. At the age of 25, he purchased a rundown resort on Saratoga Lake, the White Sulfur Spring, and by hard work and the appeal of his personality, soon made it one of the world's premier rendezvous spots for the sporting world and those who visited Saratoga Springs. Interested in the environment around him, in 1898 he began purchasing land around the lake with the idea of reforestation. Eventually, he put together a 7,000-acre preserve in the towns of Stillwater and Malta, which at the time was the largest privately owned preserve in the United States. His son, Thomas Frederick Luther, a Cornell-trained forester, worked side by side with his father, and carried on the work after his father's death. As World War II was ending, America began a race with the Soviet Union to capture German war secrets. The most prized was the V-2 rocket, the first liquid-propelled rocket that had caused so much damage when they fell on London and Paris, taking only 5 minutes from launch to landing. The Army selected engineers from the Schenectady General Electric plant because of their experience with remotely guided aircraft to go to Europe and interview captured German scientists. They were also to select papers, drawings, and rocket parts to be shipped back to America. Their campaign was codenamed Operation Paperclip. Simultaneously, another GE team was tasked with finding a convenient but secluded spot to build a test facility. They found it tucked amongst the towering pines of the Luther Forest Preserve, the 7,000-acre forest sanctuary in the towns of Malta and Stillwater that had been developed by the Luther family. The Army took 165 acres of the vast forest by eminent domain and later added a security zone, a 1-mile easement in all directions from the main facility in which no one can inhabit, stay overnight, or carry guns. Ironically, Thomas Frederick Luther had been in London serving on Eisenhower's staff when he was injured in a V-2 rocket attack and was back home recuperating when he received a call from GE. Here, in 1945, General Electric, acting as the agent for the federal government, built the Malta Rocket Test Station. Everything from office buildings to underground observation bunkers, giant gantries, spaces for delicate instruments and computers, and storage tanks for dangerous chemicals and fuels. In 1987, the Environmental Protection Agency placed the site on the Superfund National Priorities List and conducted cleanups throughout the 1990s. The cleanup has been completed, but reviews are still conducted every 5 years. From 1945 until the mid-1960s, rocket engines were assembled and put through stationary ground tests. No flight tests were ever conducted at the facility. The results could be heard as far away as Clifton Park and Saratoga Springs, while nearby residents still describe how plates rattled on the kitchen table.
I remember growing up out Lake Avenue in Saratoga Springs near the current Northway overpass during the late 1950s and early 1960s. More than once I was startled by a roar of an engine. It sounded so close, but it was several miles away. I asked my father about it, who just said it was a government project. That's all he would tell me. Maybe it was all that he knew.
The operation was named Project Hermes, after the messenger of the Greek gods. At first, the rockets were exact copies of the German V-2 rockets, but soon the program truly became American. Among the missile and satellite programs that were tested here were the Bumper, Vanguard, Vega, Discoverer, Centaur, Polaris, and Skybolt. In addition to the rocket motors, work was done on various liquid fuels and heat-resistant materials for nose cones. Its 9 major test areas and supporting facilities were capable of testing rockets from small components to complete missiles at thrust levels of up to 250,000 pounds. After testing at Malta, these components were sent to other facilities where they were incorporated into the American space program. At its height, the facility employed 470 scientists, engineers, and skilled craftsmen. By 1950, over 5,000 firings were conducted. Building number 21 was used to test ramjets, a necessary component in supersonic flight. It required vast amounts of air forced through the engine. 10 regular jet engines were required. Todd Butler went to work for General Electric in 1946 while still a student at RPI. He continued at the site after GE left and helped organize Right Malta, a company owned by former GE employees. In 2010, he sat down for an interview with the New York State Military Museum to talk about his experiences at the Malta site.
See, the test site was owned by United States Army, and I told you at one time Watervliet Arsenal thought about taking the site over. When Watervliet turned it down, it was declared excess to the needs of the Department of Defense, the test site back here. It was put up for sale in 1963 by General Services Administration. And General Services ended up selling it to the Atomic and Space Development Authority of the state of New York, which had visions of having space-related industry back here and once Atomic and Space Development Authority took it over, General Electric became the contractor operator for ASDA, Atomic and Space. And we essentially did rocket firing work for them. We did testing work. We were trying to develop the state into the space business. They were wanting to get a chunk of it, the authority.
It is not an exaggeration to say that America's first steps on the road to the moon were taken in Malta.